misses free and affordable ads and social networks without the anti-sex work rhetoric? Assembly 4 is a team of sex workers and technologists in Melbourne, Australia, aiming to bring back free and fair advertising and social spaces to the sex working community. They also give back to organizations based in harm reduction, sex work, and education. Stepping away from the clunky design of traditional platforms, their two products, Tryst.link and Switter.at, are refreshing and well-needed changes in both presentation and mission. Both are free to join and open to all. In the words of an A4 user, from the policies to the language to the advice and tips, it makes such a big difference to feel encouraged and supported instead of policed. Check out their website, assembly4.com, for the word and not the number, for more info. Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
News and stories from the sex industry.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. This week we have Trip Richards with us, who talks about transgender inclusion in porn, destigmatizing sex work, and improving queer inclusive sex education.
Hey, I'm Adrian, one of the hosts of After Adult Podcast. My porn name should be Mozart Fremont, but you probably know me better by my actual porn name, Siri.
I'm Rachel, but my porn name would be Woody 16th Avenue.
After Adult is a podcast about life and porn.
I don't actually watch porn.
I don't really watch that much porn either. I probably watch more than you, but I mean, most of the time it kind of would feel like going to work on my day off.
You 100% watch more than me, because I don't watch porn. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for After Adult.
Or visit afteradult.com and follow us on Instagram at afteradult.
We have Trip Richards with us today. Trip Richards is a 30-year-old bisexual trans man and has been involved in the adult industry for over 7 years. Trip has built his following in part by being an educator and activist at the forefront of queer porn. He hopes to normalize conversations about sex work, transgender people, and issues of content and sexual health. So welcome, Trip. It's nice to have you here today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You wear a lot of different hats.
So many.
Based on your bio. Yeah, tell us a little bit about like what that all means to you. You're a performer and you also are an activist. So what does that look like for you?
I've been a performer for, like I said, over 7 years. And I feel like when I started out, I was just a performer. I was just a sex worker.
Mm-hmm.
I was pre-transition at the time. I've been a performer throughout the entirety of my transition. And it was basically a way to pay my bills.
Yeah.
Which I think is where most of us probably started.
Right.
Totally.
But along the way, I found that as a trans person and as a sex worker who's a very visible sex worker,
Right.
that I've had more and more of an imperative to kind of use that activism, to use my platform, because I have the ear of so many people, like literally around the world,
Right.
who follow me, know me. And I kind of feel like if I was not doing stuff to advance a certain storyline, which includes transgender inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
destigmatizing sex work, improving sexual education, especially queer inclusive sex education, I feel like I would not be fully using my platform, and I would not, frankly, be fully using myself.
Right.
You know, my skills, my ability to converse with people, to advance those narratives. It just feels like it would be very one-dimensional if I was just the performer.
Right.
So how long have you been in the industry?
I started in December or January. I was trying to figure out the exact date. I was trying to figure out the first day that I took my clothes off for money. I'm not positive. It was sometime in the middle of winter of 2014. And I transitioned about a year later.
What was it like to transition while you were, naked on the internet?
It was terrifying. It was horrifying. It was completely new territory. To be honest, though, I'm grateful that I did some sex work beforehand for a couple reasons, actually. One, I know a little bit more about what it feels like to be a woman in sex work.
Yeah.
I did not identify as a woman, but I was seen as one.
Right.
So I kind of know what that feels like. And it also meant that even before I started transitioning, I had a very much improved sense of my own sexiness, honestly. Like I
Mm-hmm.
knew my body was wrong. I knew I was not comfortable presenting female, but I also realized that I had something that was valuable, that was worthwhile. And that
Mm-hmm.
really helped me. That really helped carry me through everything else.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, there's not, that many people who've worked in the industry like pre and post transition. There are
Mhm.
some, but like how did you feel like your experience when people perceived you as a woman was different than it is now?
Well, I think it was just different kind of in that obvious way. I was perceived as a different entity,
Yeah.
and it was as an entity that did not really feel authentic for me. So actually, before I transitioned, what I mostly did was BDSM work,
Mm,
and it felt a little bit safer to me because it wasn't really about my body. I
yeah.
was mostly clothed, it was or fetish gear. I felt like I always had that sort of a shield.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and people, with BDSM work, what I was mostly selling was the experience. It was selling my words,
Right.
my attitude. Whereas after I transitioned, or through transition, there's not really an end point to anything.
Right.
It's not really the before and after. It's more like before and during everything else.
Yeah, right.
But now, I have no problem, obviously, showing everything and being super, super vulnerable. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that was what changed. I went from just kind of being a one-dimensional figure before I transitioned to now I'm able to kind of be everything who's actually me.
I mean, I'm trying to think of like where to go with this because I think it's so interesting to think of starting out as this like almost like a character and like
Yes, 100%.
moving into yourself. And it's interesting, like, I don't want to, claim that I had the same experience because I didn't, but I will say that one of my experiences in this industry over kind of the same amount of time actually is that when I started much more like guarded, and I realized that if I was going to actually live this life and live the life of a sex worker and one that's like visible online, I had to just
Mhm.
embrace it and like be more vulnerable and allow my clients and the people who are like fans to actually know me as a person. And I know that different sex workers make different choices about that for like myriad reasons, but I think that movement to being like more fully yourself, like within it, is something. It changed my business, but it also changed my life.
Totally. Like for me, it's this idea of integrating who I actually am.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is over the years that I've been performing as a trans man, which admittedly has been most of my career. We talked
Right.
about sort of the very early first year, but most of my career, and certainly the part where it's been, I don't want to sound egotistical, but like successful,
Yeah, yeah.
like
I mean,
the
you're
point that I'm,
successful. Yeah,
yeah,
you can
right. But
say
I
it.
mean, the point that I am a visible, known entity as opposed to just kind of, I'm there.
Right, right, right.
But the
Mm-hmm.
point where I am like Trip Richards as the persona, as the the porn star, I don't
Right.
know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, since most of my experiences that way have been in my later post transition time, I feel like what I've been able to do during those years is really integrate my own interests.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be one dimensional in what I do. I want to show trans men, meaning myself usually, in really diverse roles. Well, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
do partner with other trans people,
Sure.
but in the films where I'm the only trans character, trans actor, I want to show trans people doing diverse things. I want to show myself not just as a bottom,
Mm-hmm.
certainly not just as a submissive person, kind of getting out of those assumptions of the heteronormativity or cis-normativity of
Yeah.
like, oh, you have a vagina, therefore you're the one getting penetrated, which
Right.
is just like so ingrained culturally.
Mm.
So what I've had this opportunity to do is kind of like use my platform and use my popularity, I guess, to say, let's break people out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's shake up their little world and integrate the things that I actually want to do, the things I actually enjoy in my personal life,
Right.
the things that I'm discovering about myself throughout that, and integrate them all into what I do on film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really amazing. I also think it's really hard, regardless of those like gender issues, in the sense that like in porn in general, there's like so many like ingrained scripts
Yeah,
that
that's one of
that
the things I
customers
wanted
just
to bring
come
up.
to like expect. Like, well, why don't you do this one thing that I expect you to do in this scene? And I'm like, I
Totally.
don't want to. Like,
Especially back in like 2014, right? I mean,
yeah.
which is not long ago, but in like porn years, it's like a lifetime
Eons.
ago, And so I think the way that like, trans perform, particularly trans masculine performers, porn has had a lot of really rigid scripts about gender. And also about like trans identity. And I'm really curious about like how you've had to wrestle with that, especially since you've been in the industry for a significant period of time.
Well, I think you're right in that porn does have like limited scripts. But the corollary to that is the porn is also kind of at the forefront of pushing change.
Yeah.
And I feel like those two factors are always sort of like rubbing against each other. And, some years or in some areas, one comes forward and you end up with like these really trite normative scripts. And then the other kind of jumps forward and it pushes this awareness in a really, really powerful way.
Yeah.
So I
Wow, I
try to
love
focus
that.
on the latter, which is the porn can be a beacon of social change. Porn can put bodies that are diverse, size, shape, color, gender, presentation,
Sure.
everything else. Porn can put these non-stereotypic bodies suddenly in front of so many viewers, and what that can do is push forward that idea of what's sexy, what is porn, what's attractive, what's normal. So I try to focus on kind of pushing the edges that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems really smart, that kind of point that it can be both like regressive and progressive at the same
Totally.
time. And we can like choose to kind of focus on and try to build the progressive side of it.
And I would even add to that I believe that some of the reason why there is so much stigma and hate against sex work, against porn, against the porn industry, is it's uncomfortable. The things that we consider normal now were definitely uncomfortable 30 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago.
Right.
Acts that were not commonly seen on film just a few years ago are now like considered mainstream.
Right.
As you
Right.
say, you get asked, Jesse, the things to do something that you don't want to, but that's because plenty of other performers are doing it now.
Sure.
And there's this kind of that expectation,
Right.
which totally can have a downside for a performer who doesn't want to.
Right.
But like porn has been able to move forward those storylines and just like bring things into the consciousness that were not there.
Yeah, it's funny too because I don't actually mean that like I feel like my boundaries are being pushed. I actually feel like I have this opportunity to like educate about the fact that people have different preferences and that while like I may be super comfortable with like anal stuff, I don't like facials. And so like I just don't want to do them. And I remember one time I had, I mean, that's so specific, but it's just the first thing that popped into my head is that I remember I had one of my regulars who like bought all of my content say to me one time, well, why don't you have any facials? And I was like, I don't know. I don't like them. I don't like things.
Isn't that powerful though?
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. I don't like things shooting in my face. Like it just freaks me out. And he was like, oh, okay. And I mean, it wasn't even an issue. It was just like this, oh, I didn't like think about the fact that maybe it's just a personal preference. And I was like,
Yep.
I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I just am not into it.
And I think that's so powerful to be able to express and identify and convey to someone. I always use the line like, I'm not a fetish vending machine.
Yeah.
I'm an autonomous person. And just because you want to come up here and push those buttons and, get your anal cream pie doesn't mean it's going to like pop out at that moment.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but I feel like throughout my years of sex work, I've gotten so much better at identifying my own preferences because I had no idea beforehand, and then expressing those boundaries.
Right.
Like I let people before sex work, or certainly even in the early years in my personal life, like walk all over them.
Yeah.
And now I don't. And I think that's been one of the huge transformations and like personal changes for me, is just to say, hey, I can own my own sexuality. I can own my own preferences. I can
Right.
own my own body, literally.
Right.
And that there's no shame in that.
I feel like that too, but I feel like that across the board, like not just in sexual things. I definitely feel that way in sexual things. And I don't feel bad at all saying, oh, yeah, I'm totally into that. You can do that. No, not that. Like, I
Hmm.
don't want that.
Hmm.
That doesn't make me feel bad in any way whatsoever. And if people aren't into that, I'm like, okay, just go someplace else, you know? So, in terms of like sexual boundaries, I very much feel like that. What I've been noticing over time is that that's extending into like kind of the sex work mentality is
Hmm.
extending to my other sort of professional pursuits in
Same.
ways that are very positive for me. I say this as somebody who came out of academia who was like very trained to like just do things for the love of it and to not like expect compensation or anything like
Hmm.
that. I've noticed that in my career, like after having spent so much time in sex work, that it's become so much easier for me to say, are you going to pay me for this? Like, how much
Yeah,
are you going to
no,
pay me for
same.
this? I didn't used to be comfortable doing things like that.
I very much relate to that. I think part of that is the whole socialized female.
Yeah.
You and I were not really taught to stick up for ourselves when it comes to salary, benefits, anything else like
Right.
that. We're supposed to be accommodating.
Right.
And my willingness to just be accommodating, like across the board, has definitely gone way, way down. I
Mine
think just as you
too.
say, I value my time differently,
Right.
and then I can pick and choose what I think is important. Like
Right.
talking to you feels important here. This is a chance to tell stories.
Right.
I like talking, I like speaking on stuff, but there's other stuff I don't enjoy doing.
Right.
And my willingness to say no or not now, or like, my bandwidth is full for this month. And
Right.
I would say, I mean, you mentioned professional, but I would say personal life, friends, acquaintances,
Hmm.
whatever. It's like I just don't feel like I'm walked over in the same way that I used to be.
Right. And I think there's a way that like customers kind of teach us how to do that
Mhm.
because you learn very quickly once you start doing sex work that like people will ask you for outrageous things and you just have to be like, no, go away, you
Mhm.
know. And I think that doing that enough like kind of gives you practice at setting those boundaries, and then you realize that once you start doing that and you quit with the time wasters, that like
Mhm.
clients who actually like value you will show up. And so I don't know, for me at least, I felt like that experience of saying no, of recognizing who's wasting your time and who values you, like extends to so many different
So
parts of your life.
much. There's a term that I use of starvation mentality when
Mhm.
I think a lot of sex workers are just getting started. We have this sense of like every person who contacts you, you have to work them.
Mhm.
Maybe they'll pay if you talk to them long enough.
Right.
And I think it is coming from a place of privilege that I have now, but
Right.
like my tolerance for engaging and tolerating is so much lower because I don't have that mentality of, oh, if I don't make this sale, I won't make any money at all.
Hmm.
Right,
And
right.
it's let me kind
Mhm.
of like prioritize, use all of my spidey senses to say, does this person seem legit? Does this person seem like they are going to follow through?
Right.
And if I have like even a tiny, tiny red flag, that's enough to say, you know what, moving on, there'll be another one.
Right. You know, I think though, and I'm glad that you talk about the fact that like this is much harder at the beginning because I think you
Mhm.
have to. I mean, there's been several times throughout my career where I've lost my biggest spender for some reason, or even
Mhm.
I had to cut off my biggest spender because they were tramping on my boundaries or causing me other sorts of distress or whatever. And at the beginning of my career, that was much harder because I was like, how am I going to pay my bills if I tell this person that I can't work with them anymore? And then I had to learn over time that when somebody is like zapping all of your psychic energy like that, that it's really hard to do your job well outside of them. And I think that what I saw is like, okay, if I cut this person off and like reserve that energy and put it out toward other customers or other clients, that actually you end up doing better.
Oh,
And
completely. Because you're not like tethered to, oh, is this person, getting their needs met because they're the one person who pays my bills? Like that
right.
feels super abusive, really.
It does. And I think it's easy when you haven't had enough years under your belt or you haven't gone through that a couple of times to and I like the way that you talked about this in terms of scarcity, to feel
Mhm.
afraid by that, like, oh, this is the only person that's going to be able to like do that, and you realize like, no, there are other people who exist.
Yeah, right. I mean,
That are going to
when we
be
think
into you.
scarcity and like, I'm the only person, you're the only person who'll ever, that reminds me of the lingo that we hear from like emotionally abusive partners. Like,
Yeah.
if you leave me, nobody else will ever love you. Even if I'm a horrible person, you shouldn't leave me because everybody else is even worse. Like,
Right.
that just feels like so manipulative and like getting them under somebody's skin and tearing them down, tearing down their confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that in personal life, and I've heard equivalents of that in work life. And
Yeah.
now, like, there's zero tolerance.
Right. And I feel like that works slightly differently in work life in the sense that, like, clients don't have to say that to come in, give you a lot of money at the beginning, take up a lot of your time and energy, and you give it to them because they're the ones that are giving you the largest sums of money. And then you're like, oh shit, now I neglected these other, like, other smaller relationships in favor of this one. And it's complicated. Sex work is complicated, but I feel like it gets simpler the longer that you're in it.
I would agree. I mean, things are really complicated right now just because of like policy stuff and
Yeah,
big picture
absolutely.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I would agree that at a personal level, I am fortunate that basically my sex work kind of runs itself at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And that frees up my time to talk to you and worry about politics and, do
Yeah.
other things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like at this point, I am spending so little time directly on the sex work
Yeah.
that it's
Mm-hmm.
almost a little silly. But I feel very fortunate that I am at that point, that I can do that.
Yeah. And is that
I'm
because
like,
you have
did I
like
do anything today?
you have to put the work in to build up an apparatus for that to happen.
Exactly. Like I don't want to say that in the kind of ego trip way because it feels super exclusionary and as you say, does not include the people who are struggling. But I think those of us who had more passive income sources or just fortunate, I mean, I'm willing to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
What it's done is it's freed up that time for me to be not a porn star, but instead a trans man body, an
Yeah.
activist body,
Mm-hmm.
a sex worker activist body. And that's honestly what I mostly do these days.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. So, you talking about these like two legs of your career. You have like the porn star leg and then like the activist leg. And now it sounds to me like what you've said is that like it started off being very heavily the porn star side and is now kind of leaning in the other direction because you have the freedom like with passive income and stuff to do that. Do you ever feel like there's like a conflict between those two?
Yes and no. I think that there's a conflict from a purely marketing economic sense, which is that sometimes I talk about things on my platforms that are not sexy and that I'm sure plenty of my followers would rather just skim on over and, prefer they didn't exist at all. Like many of my followers just want to see me getting naked and sticking a dick in me, and they have no interest in my opinions. And I recognize that fact, even though it rankles me, but I recognize that. So I think that there is a balance of like not having too many opinions because I still want these people to pay my bills. But what I do personally is my premium platforms, OnlyFans, Just for Fans, stuff like that. There's no politics.
Yeah.
There's no stated opinion. I personally think that my porn itself does send a message. It sends a message of inclusion, it sends a message of diversity, it sends a message of trans men can be multifaceted. But I'm never going to put up like a text post about my opinions. Whereas my free social media, it's fair game.
Yeah.
And I mean, I basically let people know if you want just the porn, you need to cough up a few dollars.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're getting this.
Yeah, I like that. And there was a period of time, I mean, in my that I was afraid of that and had like, another Twitter account that was just a promo account and then one that I actually like spewed my opinions and then I realized that I didn't want to do that anymore. That there was actually something about like at least on like Twitter like being a whole person and being like, oh, well, if you want to look at my promo stuff, you also have to listen to me talk about Fosta Sesta or like whatever.
Completely.
Whatever's happening.
And that to me is the idea of integrating these various parts of ourselves and actually being an entire human, which is really, really important to me. And that actually fits into my own sex worker activism of if you don't see a sex worker as an entire human being, as an autonomous being, as a multifaceted being, you're not going to respect them.
Right.
And, for me, it is so important to build up every sex worker as a full, independent, 3D human being that needs to be addressed that way, because they're not the fetish vending machine.
Right.
They're not just, a blank slate for you to apply your own desires or images onto. Like, we are people ourselves. And to me, that is such a crucial piece of it. And honestly, I would rather, and I'm sure I have, lost some potential fans who would sign up for a month just to jerk off in favor of the people who are like, hey, this Trip Richards guy is doing good work. I also like his porn. I'm going to say stay subscribed, for a year.
Right.
And that's the kind of market that I'm really personally going for.
Yeah.
It seems like social media has really kind of been a game changer. I mean, now it's been around for like 20 years, but still, insofar as you have a space to kind of present yourself as a whole person in a way that I think probably was a lot more difficult for, performers and sex workers of generations
Definitely.
past,
Certainly, if the only image or words that somebody, a viewer heard of a performer were like what they do in the video that you buy, it's far harder for them to be like, a dimensional person.
Yeah, that's why I think I'm so upset by the deplatforming of sex workers, because I think that, it's important that people see that we have a cat and, all of the random stuff that makes us like full human beings, and the way that we interact with each other and with like our fans, I think you're right. It changes people's perception just from, a body that they like to jerk off to a human being that they could imagine having some connection to.
And dehumanization is one of the first steps towards violence as well.
Absolutely.
And violence can come in multiple forms, not just physical, but if you think of somebody as one-dimensional and not even as a somebody, just an object, it's really easy to not care about their rights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of these like anti-porn movements are kind of disingenuous, right? Because they're sort of decrying that humanization, but at the same time, they're also like working to deplatform sex workers
Absolutely.
and deny us that like multidimensionality.
Especially because indie productions like OnlyFans or, direct video sales through a platform, anything like that, are the most credible opportunity for an independent performer to have autonomy, to have a life, to not be exploited by a system. Like that is the best way to address all of these concerns about the industry, is actually to put the power back to each individual performer. So yeah, it's totally disingenuous.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like in Melissa J. Grant's book, Playing the Whore, I mean, one of the things that she talks about is that and this is in like a full service context, but that the anti-sex work rhetoric and the anti-sex work feminists, the SWERFs, dehumanize and objectify sex workers way more than like, and in way harsher ways than clients and like customers do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have had such good experiences with clients and customers. I mean, I've done literally every form of sex work there is over the last 7 years. And I mean, with overwhelming majority of them are polite, respectful, curious, enthusiastic. I mean, the whole gamut of experiences. The hate that I get is for people who are not sex workers and not clients.
Right.
They're people who really are uninterested in the entire process. They have they have no stake in it. And of course, it's easy to dehumanize an industry that you have no info about and no connection to.
Right. And then you read their descriptions of what's happening in the sex industry and you're like, what the fuck?
You're like, who is this happening to? Like, I'm not saying that abuse and exploitation does not happen, because it's a big world and everything happens somewhere.
Sure.
But that is not the story.
Right.
Like, that is not the monolith of a story.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's I mean, it's clearly there are shit clients out there, but it's what you were saying, that idea of it being such a monolithic narrative, as if there's only one thing going on, I think is what's so frustrating about the way that they talk about the industry.
And it doesn't matter how many people like yourself or myself speak up and say, hey, but that's not my story.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just like, we're told that we either do not possess the bodily autonomy and self-reflection to recognize that we're being exploited, which
Right.
as a consenting adult, I have a real problem being told that no, you can't consent to the things you're consenting to.
Right.
Like that's stripping away my own powers
Sure.
and autonomy,
Right.
or being told that I am the problem, that I am part of the devolving
Right.
of humanity, society. So
Right.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
those really rankle me because those are the two choices. Like we are either the enemy or we are the victim, even if we say no, we're not being victimized.
Right. Right.
Right. Yeah. That's why I really liked what you were saying earlier about like porn being kind of progressive and regressive at the same
It
time.
can be,
Because,
yeah.
yeah, because like, then I think we can acknowledge the problems that exist within porn or within sex work more broadly or within a, sexist and, you know, misogynist society.
Mhm.
But the answer isn't just simply, oh, let's, ban porn or let's criminalize
It's
sex
never
work.
the answer.
It's got to be much more complicated. It's how do we, work within those structures to produce things that are, more progressive. And I think that that's a conversation that a lot of people aren't willing to have, or like a level of nuance that a lot of people aren't willing to engage in.
Hello, this is Chelsea Poe from TroubledFilms.com. I'm here to tell you about getting access to hot BDSM, queer, trans, and dyke porn all in one place. With code PEEPSHOW21, you can get 21% off your next order from TroubledFilms.com. Again, that's code PEEPSHOW21, TroubledFilms.com.
Absolutely. It's as you say, nuance. It doesn't fit into a quick soundbite. It doesn't even fit into a tweet. It
Mm-hmm.
is this idea that multiple things can be true at once, multiple experiences can coexist from the very worst to the very best, and all of them are valid, all of them are real. And the answer is not just to just like pick one of them and say, all of you are having this experience, therefore it's all bad.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that would be as dumb as the opposite, which is to say that all sex work is amazing and everyone should be a sex worker. Because neither of these are true. The truth is always somewhere in the middle, and the
Right.
truth is multifaceted. But anytime that individual performer, like I was saying earlier, becomes one-dimensional and dehumanized,
Mm-hmm.
what I think we're seeing right now is this kind of industry-wide of everyone is being made one-dimensional. They are either a victim or they are an enemy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And both of them need either saving or destroying.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to go back to this. Yeah, I mean I see all of that, and it's all like infuriating. And I'm
It's
also
like pathological, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
that's like a really problematic way to approach the world.
yeah, but it's like so ingrained in like an entire generation of like people, especially coming out of like second wave feminism. I feel like
Mhm.
my mom's whole like generation of liberal white feminists have this like intense kind of I mean obviously not everybody because there's nothing that's like no all statements make sense, but the whole like that whole like kind of visceral reaction against sex work and pornography as
Mhm.
if
Porn is
it's
violent, porn is exploitative. Yeah,
right.
I
Yeah.
hear that.
And it's like it's impossible for them to get out of this mind frame, and like no amount of counter narrative seems to make any difference.
Agreed. Honestly, those are the folks I find the most frustrating. People who are liberal minded, as you say, often, queer friendly,
Mhm.
diverse people, but they're like so married to this rhetoric that porn, takes something away from human sexuality, that human
Right.
sexuality is in some way something special, but only when it's private, which is such a
Right.
weird concept to me, especially coming from a liberal person.
Right.
But yeah, I confront those. I deal with those. I find them very frustrating because really what they're doing is saying that I, Trip, you, Jessica, each of us are not allowed to make these choices.
Right.
And that is such a weird, a weird hill for them to stake their claim and die on.
It really is.
I think it's kind of the white savior complex. It's in my experience mostly like liberal older white women.
Right.
I think it definitely fits into that. It fits into this idea of, we are smart, we are educated, we are feminists, we know what's good for you. And I'm like, I love everything about that except the last sentence.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny. I always remember a friend of mine who's not in the sex industry was talking to me one time, but who's involved in kind of a politics, local politics, and we were talking about decrim one time, and she was like, "Well, I would like to see regulation and testing and blah blah blah," and I remember thinking to myself and like having a really hard time like staying in the conversation, like, what does it matter what you would like to see? This like isn't about you. Like,
Isn't that such a powerful thing to be able to tell somebody though? Like, this isn't about you. This doesn't affect you.
You're not a
And
sex
why are
worker.
you
You're
so
not a
worried about
client.
this?
Like, what does it matter what you want to see? This is not about you.
That is so real. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So one of the things I also wanted to like, speaking of this kind of like liberal feminist framework, one of the things that I've noticed in my work and my client base, and I don't know if this is just like because of who I attract, but like one of the things that's been difficult for me in having this like in doing a lot of like writing and activism and things like that under my sex work brand is that I end up having like clients who have some sort of guilt and who want to show me that they respect me by like not buying my stuff.
Oh, that's bizarre. I respect you so much that I don't think that you deserve income to live on.
Right. Yeah. And
I don't want to demean you by paying you.
Oh, that's bizarre. Yeah.
For your porn. In other words, your labor.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I love your writing. I follow you. Your opinions are so interesting. Yeah, I just want you to know that like I'm not one of those guys who like engages in your porn. And I'm like, then why are you DMing me? Why don't you just buy my stuff?
Or why doesn't he ask for your Cash App or Venmo or something and just send you some no obligation money?
Right. And I think that like for me, that's been really frustrating because I feel like if I have to explain to you why it's okay for you to engage in my work, that's just extra like emotional labor that's being put on me.
Exactly.
To like absolve them of their guilt of like wanting to engage sexually with my sexual content. And that's actually been kind of a consistent thing that's been hard to get over for me.
Well, I think what you're really hitting on there, bizarre as that situation is in specific, I think what you're hitting on is how ingrained sexual shame is in society.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because if there was not sexual shame, that person, first off, would never have thought those things. They certainly would not have had felt the need to come to you to get their guilt absolved, as you say. Like, it's all coming from this idea that you cannot be a sexual, naked, beautiful woman and also have ideas.
Right.
And that is like the most anti-feminist thing possible.
Right.
This idea
but actually
that she has to be one or the other.
Feminism, which is really interesting.
Yeah. No, I definitely see that one. It's just like I can be all of these things at once. And frankly, even if you don't like my porn, even if my porn doesn't turn you on, you can still support what I'm doing because you believe in it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I've done little tiny bits of emotional labor there and actually like walked people through that and say, if you like what I'm saying, here's a way to support it. Like, I'm not going to force you to take your penis out and jerk off to it. But if you want to see what I'm doing, that's fine. I won't be offended.
Right.
And I would like your money, please, because that would let me keep having opinions.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise I'm going to have to go get a job and I won't have time to share all of my opinions with social media.
Basically. But no, it's all coming from this place of shame. I mean, I think a lot of it is religiously driven, but it's everywhere. Like, it's everywhere in society. This idea that sex and sexuality cannot be integrated into all parts of life. this idea that it is a secret.
Yeah.
Certainly as a queer trans man, I have been so many people's dirty little secret.
Yeah, I
And
bet.
while that certainly pays some of my bills, it makes me very uncomfortable, which is why I call those people out. I call those situations out. It's like, if I am just this secret you jerk off to, are you really a trans ally? I would
Right.
say no. I mean, I'm glad for your money that you buy my video, but I would much rather you become a vocal, proud trans ally, that it's not just a secret in your bedroom.
Right.
You need to see me as a person in society.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's so true. I've talked to a lot of BBW models who've had the same experience, and I would say that too, is that I've had a lot of people who like have what they would like, what I would call, I guess they don't talk about their own spouses like this, but like trophy wives. And then they're like, oh, but the like kind of fat tattooed like thing that you are is like very sexy to me. But like,
But they wouldn't be seen with you in public.
yeah. And I find that offensive.
Totally. 100%. Yeah.
You know, and oh, I love your body. And I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Why is that so shocking to you? You know?
Right. And why do you feel the need to tell me that, as if that's something that's, subversive in any way?
Yeah, yeah. And so I can only imagine, like, as a trans person, like how much you would get that, because I think anyone who has any kind of body that doesn't fit like our conventional standards, there's so much. The thing that I love about the sex industry is there's so much space for that.
It's so diverse when you start looking.
Yeah, it's so much more diverse than Hollywood, so much more diverse
So
than any other forms of like entertainment. And it's because people have like such diverse desires. But the fact that those desires are kept secret, I think is it's kind of a difficult thing to juggle.
It's a little bit of a letdown for me because, as you say, porn is diverse and the tastes of people out there in the world are so fucking diverse, like incredibly so. Anytime a new model comes to me and is like, do I have an audience? Will people buy my stuff? I'm like, go try, go make it, see what happens.
Right.
Like, I don't know, but probably, just statistically, the answer would be yes. People want whatever you're selling.
Yeah.
But then I do have that frustration at the end of that it feels like we have all the pieces there, and yet the world itself and the way that people interact with each other and the amount of fat phobia and transphobia and homophobia and biphobia and racism and everything. And, like that all ableism, that all of those things are still so present, even amongst the same people who love our bodies, who love those diverse bodies, who love what we're doing with them, but they still like wouldn't be caught dead with us in their friend circle, let alone, dating us. So I have a real frustration there. I don't have an answer to it.
Yeah.
I guess my only answer is let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's keep normalizing it. Let's get out of the really fetishy categories.
Right.
I don't, how should I say it? I am a trans man and I'm willing to identify that way. But to me, I'm just a guy. My body is a guy's body. You're a woman. You don't need any other labels or qualifiers.
Right.
And I struggle with this because, in search terms, search engine optimization, like you have to use these tags, you have to use these categories.
Right.
Because that's the way that viewers will come to me. But at the same time, I'm like, that category is itself limiting. It's saying this is all I am.
Right.
And I would much rather just like, a catch-all.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? Like, do you feel pressure to categorize, or like, or have you just at this point in your career decided that you don't want to do that? Or how do you do that?
It's still a mix of all of those things. Sometimes I just go out into the woods and scream, and that's my coping mechanism. But
Seems like a good coping strategy.
Yeah, it's honestly highly recommended. But so at a practical level, one of the things that I really, really work to do is make trans men specifically visible, because you go to a lot of sites and trans is just kind of a catch-all. But really, it's marketed and branded towards trans women,
right?
Which is great. I love trans women; they're beautiful. I want them to have a space.
Yeah.
But the fact that the consumer, as well as the site itself, is built around this idea that trans only means male to female women,
right?
is itself limiting. It's limiting like the consciousness of viewers through that words, through that branding. So I fight really hard to just get trans men listed or to get trans people at all listed in places they don't like exist
Yeah.
from the standpoint of the site.
Mhm.
So that's a big thing. But then I feel like that's kind of the battle to be fought right now. Like that's sort of my generation's battle to fight is like, hey, hello, we're here. And then the next generation, as it were, which is, every couple years in porn. But
Right.
I feel like the next generation is to say, let's dismantle that completely. And, we're men or we're just all people.
Right.
I certainly like I like the challenge that non-binary performers are posing to the porn industry because you're like, okay, you're not fitting in either category in this binary approach.
Yeah.
You don't want to fit in either category. Neither is authentic for you, and yet you exist. You're here. You're making porn. You're
Right.
selling porn. So it's like we're going to at some point come to the point where there's enough people who do not easily categorize,
Right.
who are not cisgender, who are not cisgender passing, who have no interest in being part of that binary. And they're, I think, going to be part of that kind of next generation that says, this is a big wild world. And as long as we have some way for the viewer to connect to the performer in
Right.
some way, some category, some tag, something, that's going to be like the ultimate goal. But like I said, right now, my main goal professionally is just like letting people be aware that I exist, letting people know that trans men in general exist. And also, I will say, letting people know that trans men are not one-dimensional in what we do in bed. And that's
Yeah.
been a huge thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I think that one of the beautiful things I think that porn can do. I remember talking to like just giving people space to like what they like and want what they want, which I think is really difficult for a lot of people. I remember talking to Jet Setting Jasmine on the show one time, on this show one time, and one of the things that she was saying is that as even as like a viewer, she felt like being able to see people do things that like she wanted to do or she like had a desire to do but felt were weird in some way or that she wasn't supposed to like,
Taboo.
kind of gave her this freedom to be like, oh my God, like, but I can do this and I can like this. And there's something about porn, I think, that has this like ability to undo some of the shame that we have about parts of ourselves or our desire or our
I would agree
bodies.
completely. I mean, I think it's super transformative for somebody to go through that experience. I certainly, of watching and having those worlds opened up to them. I mean, if you think of it, the viewer who's jerking off before bed, if the last thing that they see is a body that is different,
Yeah.
a body that, is doing something different, is pushing a different storyline forward, that's like a really powerful thing to go to sleep with.
Yeah.
And that's how I like to think of it is like we those of us who are performers, we are pushing forward a different set of storylines, a different set of possibilities. And I think we're doing, the emotional labor and therapy along the way of
Yeah.
telling people it's okay to like this and it's okay because we exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a client yesterday and these kind of experiences always like warm my heart, who I had been talking to him for a while about like this desire that he had that was bothering him. And I talked to him yesterday for like an hour and talked him through it. And then I got this message this morning that said, oh my gosh, after we got off the phone yesterday, I spent some time indulging in this fantasy. And it was just like a fantasy he had that he like wanted permission to play out in his head. And he said, I didn't have any guilt or any fear about it. I just let my imagination play with that and I feel so much better. And I was like, oh my God.
I love that.
I love
it's
this.
so
Yeah.
therapeutic because I
Yeah.
think sex workers, we're like priests and doctors. Like we give people a space that is confidential, that is safe. And I think, the very fact that we are sex workers and therefore considered sort of outside of society gives us that safety because they're like, they're like, whatever I say here is safe. Like they're not going to talk about it. Like
Right.
it's, we are so separate. We are so other, which can definitely be detrimental at times. But I think that's one of the beauties of it is that we provide this, like, it's a whole other universe that they go into.
Yeah.
Certainly
Mhm.
in-person work, I've experienced that. But I would say even just like chat messages on the fan pages, stuff like that, like they know that I'm not going to judge them because I
Right.
am in no position to judge anyone.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I feel that a lot in my work. I feel like people tell me things that they don't tell their partners because they're afraid of their partner's rejections, but they're not particularly afraid of my rejection. And I don't think that I don't take that as a negative. I take that as like I almost feel like honored to be in this position in which people can explore something that they're afraid to explore.
Definitely, and that they feel safe doing so because they know I won't judge them. They know I won't tell.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think they just feel like it's a safe place, and I'm
Yeah.
certainly really glad to foster that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also this kind of like, you show me yours, I show you mine kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Yeah.
where because I am so vulnerable,
Mm.
even if only visually, that they're like, okay, I can be vulnerable, and sometimes it's with the dick pic, but often it's with words. It's, as you
Right.
say, the
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. It's the thing that they explicitly cannot tell their partner.
Mm-hmm.
It's that thing that's just been niggling at them forever.
Right.
Like, I'm glad to provide that space. And I
Yeah.
definitely think that that's one of the like super therapeutic services that sex workers provide that's very rarely talked about.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not our performative parts of us. It's like this mental space.
Yeah. I thought,
It's the reason that I mean, speaking from my experience, at least when I was escorting, there were plenty of smart, successful, handsome men who hired me.
mm-hmm.
It wasn't people who had no other options, which I think is the stigma against
Sure.
clients.
Right. Yeah.
It's people who needed something a little different, or needed the convenience of it, or needed the variety of it. I mean, it's a whole gamut of reasons,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but none of them were coming from this place of desperation.
Right.
Mm.
I think that that's really important. I mean, PJ and I have been talking about this for a long time, that there are plenty of annoying clients, and I do my like bitching about like clients sometimes, but like for the most part, like my experiences with clients have been very similar to what you're talking about. And I think that the way in which we demonize clients, not you and I, but like the
Mhm.
culture, demonizes clients only works to further like sex work stigma, right? So like
100%.
we're people who just take these desperate gross men, or somehow shield like innocent women from like the
Mhm.
violence and the disgustingness of incels or whatever. Like, there's all this like very strange horphobic rhetoric around clients too, that I think that a lot of that needs to be undone for there to be any
Completely.
progress.
Yeah, 100%. And that's ties into, I think, the idea of sexual shame that so many
Mm-hmm.
people, especially so many men, carry because they themselves have a hard time getting out of that dichotomy.
Yeah.
It's the guys who say, like, their wife is one person, they put her on a pedestal, but they can do their quote dirty
Mm.
things with a
Mm-hmm.
sex worker,
Mm.
Right.
as opposed to integrating those parts within themselves.
Right. It's like that whole beginning of, I mean, this was 20 years ago, so I don't know if you remember this, but like the first episode of The Sopranos, one of the things that Tony Soprano said about his wife is like, oh, she kisses my kids. Like I can't,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow, you have a
Yep.
good memory.
yeah, I mean, it stood out. Like,
Yes.
I need to go to what do they use the word kumwa or whatever, the other woman, for the
Mhm.
dirty stuff and the blowjobs because my wife kisses my kids with
Yeah.
her mouth,
Like,
and
how bizarre is that?
it's really
And
weird.
yet it's so ingrained. I mean, I've definitely heard versions thereof, and
Hmm.
that's part of like, sex worker experience, sex worker lore is that idea. I mean, what if there was like one thing that you would want clients to know? What would that be?
Oh, that's like such a
Like to
good
dismantle
question.
that.
Um, I mean, one of the things that I find myself saying a lot in a lot of different contexts is that like their sexual desires are normal, like a normal
Yeah,
part
just
of
like saying it's okay.
sexuality. Yeah, it's okay. Like, I feel like a lot of my work, especially around like fetish stuff, is coming out of so much shame and like, isn't this embarrassing that I want this? And,
Mhm.
and this is like a dirty secret. And I think, and I was talking last week, I had Dr. David Lay on the show last
Oh,
week.
wonderful. Yeah, love his
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. And it was really great because one of the things that he and I were talking about is I was saying that from a therapeutic standpoint, he's probably had a similar experience where, like, once you've done this for so long, you realize that so many of these desires that people feel so alone in are actually so common and so, like, universal. And
Mhm.
Right.
so it's hard for me to hold a lot of shame because, like, of personal shame, because I'm like, I've just been exposed to so many things. And they haven't, like, they don't have our vantage point, and I think that I would want clients to know that, like, what they're feeling, first of all, are just feelings, and not every single feeling needs to be acted on.
Totally.
And second of all, that, like, it's okay, and that their relationships with us can also be, like, really healthy. I think that the work that sex workers do is really important work.
I mean, it feels so essential.
Mhm.
And I liked what you said. I get kind of the idea from you. You're a little unflappable. Like you're hard to shock.
Yeah, I kind of am,
You're
I
hard to
think.
surprise. Yeah, and same. I mean, whenever I have sex with somebody now who is just in my personal life, they're not another performer, they're not another sex worker, they're certainly not a client, just personal,
Mhm.
which I sometimes forget is a thing, but like sometimes people just like have sex with their friends. And I find myself being just like, I'm so chill, whatever happens. Like, oh, you don't
Right.
feel like that. Okay, cool. You want a
Right.
different position. Okay, cool.
Right.
And they're like apologizing, like, I'm sorry it took me so long to come. I'm sorry I didn't like that position. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry my body made a weird noise. Just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that I hope that I've helped my friends that way to just be like, yeah, Trip, like you're not going to surprise them with anything.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's one of those things where I wish that I could sort of export those experiences and those feelings that I have, about sex basically
Right.
to everyone. Like I don't think
Mhm.
everyone needs to be a sex worker, but I
Right.
wish that everyone could have those experiences to say like it's normal. The human body is normal. Your desires are normal. As you
Right.
say, it's okay to fantasize about something. Doesn't mean you want to do it. And
Yeah.
like it's okay.
Right.
Um, but the more we build up this idea of it is something dirty, is something depraved, it is
Mhm.
something that must be hidden, it is something that is unnatural.
Right.
Yeah, that just
Yeah, like
adds
with
to the stigma.
that person I was talking about who just sent me the message this morning. I mean, one of the conversations that I had with him yesterday is he was asking me about the morality of like a particular thing. And I was like,
Mm,
and I said to him, I'm like, I don't necessarily think that that's right. However, I'm not judging you for having that thought. And also, there's a huge difference between doing something and like fantasizing about it.
totally.
And I
There's a
was like,
massive gap.
yeah, and I was like, there's a whole, like, humans are imaginative creatures. Like, why would you punish yourself for like having a thought?
And I think that's like the very Puritan sort of shame that unfortunately in the United States we are like built with apparently.
Hmm.
Even those of us who are like immigrants to this country, we still sort of pick it up, this idea of like, you thought a bad thing and God sees you masturbating in the shower.
Right, right.
Who's supposed to watch us? Is it Jesus who's watching us masturbate or God? I don't know.
I
Somebody's watching us
think God
masturbate.
watches us.
Yeah, is it God? He
Jesus
does?
is
Okay, got it.
embodied, so he can't be everywhere at once.
Okay, okay, got it. But like this
Wow,
idea
getting
of I
deep.
thought a bad thing, I was thinking about a bad thing, I want to do a
Yeah.
bad thing, forgetting whether it's bad or not. That seems very ingrained.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm very much in like BDSM communities as well. And there's such lines there about like consent for public play. Like, can you involve other people in your play? And
Yeah.
like, I talk a lot about consent in my work. It's something that, I mean, it's very important and I think it's important to talk about. But always within it is this idea that it's okay to like want to be flogged in the middle of the grocery store. That doesn't make you a bad person.
Right.
That's hot. Let's see if there's a way that we can kind of build some of that into our play. For
Right.
example, I can whisper to you while we're in the grocery store about what I want to do to you
Yeah.
and, get
Hmm.
you that experience in the way it does not involve other non-consenting people.
Right, right. And that there's so
There's
many,
always a
like,
workaround.
that's the fun thing about sexuality is that there's so many ways that we can get at like what our desires are, you know, and like what's at base like in those. So, okay, you can't get flogged in the middle of the grocery store, but like, what is it that you're seeking from that? And how can we make some of those things happen within bounds?
And I think that what that all comes down to is conversation and, talking with someone, communicating with someone. And that's something that in my own work, I really try to showcase. Like even in videos, I'm going to leave in when I edit, I'm going to leave in, I asked for more lube. I asked for a different position. I talk, I laugh. It's not just like bang, 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 all sex.
Right.
Because I think that showing like what does real sex look like, even amongst experienced performers, is so important for viewers.
Yeah.
And sure,
Right.
they can skip over bits or ignore it, but that's my way of, slowly brainwashing them as they watch my videos to be like, oh, we can talk about things. Oh, we can stop for a minute.
Yeah.
That like real sex does not look like, quote, porn sex. And even porn sex doesn't look like porn sex.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just realized that we are running like so far over time. I've taken up more than an hour
Well,
because
you're so easy to talk to, though. We have lots of things to say.
I looked over and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've taken a lot of your time. But I love this conversation. I really appreciate your insight and where you're coming from and what you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
And where can people find you?
I can be found everywhere on the internet. All of me is everywhere. Honestly, a Google search of XXX Transman, TRIPLEX will get you to all of my stuff. I am like the entire first page of Google. I'm on OnlyFans. I'm on Just for Fans. I also have Twitter, Instagram, all the social stuff. And follow my Twitter is great. It's at XXX Transman.
Great. Thank you so much. I really had a good time talking to you.
Oh my gosh, so much. Same. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.